Hello my Patreon friends, and I hope you're having a nice Friday and looking forward to your weekend. And to ease you towards that time, let's talk about HiFi news. I've got a hint and tip, and I also have some trivia. So let's start with the trivia. And we are going to stick with the prize giving theme this time round. And the question is a simple one. Which artist won the Grammy for Album of the Year in 1974, 1975, and 1977? Once more, which artist won the Grammy for the Album of the Year in 1974, 75, and 1977? Stick around to the end of this video and I'll give you the answer. Until then, let's have some HiFi news. We have two Lumina Amateur, I'm not sure. Anyway, we have the Lumina 2 and the Lumina 5 Amateur models, which feature technical improvements as well as finishes. And those finishes, well, let's get those out the way first. We have all kinds of glossy finishes, glossy red, glossy walnut, and that word that I can never remember. I learn and then I forget. W-E-N-G-E. Tell me how to pronounce it, please. Someone. I always forget. People always tell me, and I always forget. It's one of those words I have trouble recalling. Anyway, this speaker line features a damped Ampex dome tweeter featuring Kurt Muller hand-coated soft silk diaphragm of 29mm. There's also a 102mm mid-range unit equipped with custom-made basket and the diaphragm featuring cellulose pulp blended with other natural fibers. And underneath that, there's a 127mm mid-range unit featuring Sonus Faber's proprietary natural fiber and paper blend air-dried diaphragm. There's a mouthful. And below that, same thing, another 127mm, well look, that's about 5 inches, I think, base unit featuring a paper pulp cone. Now, the enhancements for the new models derive from the crossover. They have been tweaked. The Lumina 2, that crossover network is now up to 2600 Hz with a plus 800 Hz difference compared to the original Lumina 2. The Lumina 5 Amateur's frequency of the crossover is now up to 2850 with a plus 250 Hz difference compared to the Lumina 5. So what do these tweaks actually do in effect? Well, apparently they enhance the soundstage, they give it a more 3D effect, they enhance the detail. So, on that basis, well worth listening to. Prices, the Lumina Amateur 2, you're looking at £1,299 or €1,499 or $1,499. For the Lumina Amateur 5, £2,999 or €3,499, and the same in dollars. Now we have staggered release dates. We have a European release date of December 2023 for both of these upgraded speakers. For the rest of the world, you're looking at January 2024. A turntable now from Musical Fidelity called the M8X-TT. Now, Musical Fidelity is back in the turntable game with a high-end model based on the earlier M1, which hit the streets around 2004, I think it was. That earlier design was created in cooperation with Pro-Ject. That is, it wasn't a badged Pro-Ject turntable, I'm led to believe, but more of a cooperative effort. Similar, I would guess, to how NAD worked with Pro-Ject for the NAD turntables, the 558 and the 588. Although, of course, this Musical Fidelity design is on a completely different scale, and I reckon this turntable has trodden a similar pathway. So what you've got here is a twin-speed, mass-loaded, belt-driven design with a heavy aluminium platter created in layers with TPE damping in between each. That holds an inverted bearing with a ceramic ball tip, and that sits on an acrylic plinth. Now, the musical Fidelity 10-inch tone arm is brand new. It has adjustable VTA and azimuth and has an aluminium tube with TPE damped counterweights. The rear of the platter offers both RCA and XLR balanced sockets. The motor sits within the plinth and it reaches down to the lower acrylic level of the platter, and it's held in place by a foam substance which decouples it from the plinth. The whole turntable runs on a silicon belt, and the feet underneath hold more TPE damping. Also included is a stabilizer puck and a leather mat. Price for that is £8,249. And speaking of Pro-Ject, which I was, kinda, we have a trio of new products from that very company. And the first one is the Tube Box DS3B. This is a moving magnet and moving coil phono amplifier. It has a dual mono electrical layout, valve output stage, and balanced connection options. The unit also has a fully adjustable impedance dial on the front panel. The Tube Box DS3B is the first in this company's range to add balanced input and output options to the mix as part of Pro-Ject's true balanced connection concept. It still features single-ended RCAs if you need them, but it also means because of that you can connect two turntables or tone arms at the same time. The input settings for load, gain, capacitance and the subsonic filter are stored in the memory as you switch between the RCA and XLR input options. The DS3B is housed in an aluminium casing that protects it against interference. It benefits from an external power adapter for lower noise and can also be upgraded with a linear power supply as well. As with other DS line electronics, the Tube Box DS3B can also be visually upgraded with magnetically attached wooden side panels. Price for this, £949. Next is the MC Step-Up Box, the DS3B. This is a step-up transformer for moving core cartridges, and it's particularly suited to balanced turntable connections. Now, step-up transformers exist to passively increase the output level of a moving core cartridge. The level of gain achieved is defined by the winding ratio of the transformer, and by making this initial gain phase entirely passive, no extra power is required, and the audio signal can maintain its integrity. At least that's the theory. Further benefits is that less electrical power is now required from the phono stage, further allowing the signal to be free of unwanted electrical noise. Again, in theory, it's good stuff. This DS3B makes use of high-quality Lundahl LL1678 audio transformers, which bodes well. It's also possible to select between RCA and XLR inputs and outputs, as well as choosing between two transformer ratios, depending on the level of gain required. Price for that one, £799. In review terms, well, this is a category I've kind of bypassed. I haven't ignored it on purpose. And oddly enough, I've been talking to Graham Slee about reviewing one of their step-ups. So Maybe this is a kind of area I need to look at, a sort of mini investigation, this particular class of hardware. We'll see. In the meantime, then, before we leave this area, let me also tell you about another step up, also from Pro-Ject. And this one is a little bit smaller, but sort of smaller in depth, smaller in height, and cheaper as well. It's called the MC Step Up Box S3, and it's strictly for single-ended mode. Like I say, it's smaller, it's a bit lighter as well, as you might expect, than the balanced version, by just over half a kilogram, I would say. £399 is the asking price for that. All of these models, all of these Pro-Ject models will be out this month. Next up, we're looking at an upgraded, tweaked, possibly, cartridge range from Ortofon called the 2MR. Now, I find this news item rather fascinating, and I don't know, maybe I'm doing them a disservice, but possibly a little sneaky from Ortofon, who are seeing a big sector of the market pass them by because their budget 2M range might be a little tall for some turntables, especially those that do not offer variable, easily accessible tone arm height settings. So Ortofon has designed a low cart height version of the 2M. The 2MR is what it's called. R for, I don't know, reduction possibly? I'm not sure. Although the new 2MR uses the same styli as the basic older 2M range to retain compatibility. As for the housing, well, it knocks off about 3 millimeters from the 2M design. So you have a reduced housing mode, a low form factor version even, one that does not require, and I quote, spacers to change the tone arm height to suit. Getting any clues from that? Ortofon also says that the cartridge can also be quickly mounted with just 2 screws. Now, why bother to say that when most cartridges are already mounted with 2 screws? Unless. Now, I can name a few turntables that fall under this type of design that might benefit from a reduced height cartridge. Even so, even most of those kind of get away with using a slightly taller cartridge, and that doesn't make, because of their price point, it doesn't make a massive difference. Now, in the press release, they do mention Pro-Ject and they mention Lin, but the one big, in my opinion anyway, the one big, largely untapped market sector for Ortofon is, of course, Riga. Now, Riga, again, in my opinion, they lock out most of the all, I would say, of the third-party cartridges because they demand a very shallow cartridge chassis. And because of that demand, and because if you do really want to use a third-party cartridge, you have to take a Riga arm and you have to add shims to increase the height, and because that's a hassle, and because most people can't be bothered, Riga tends to have the cartridge sector for their own turntables to themselves. Well, now I think Ortofon is targeting Riga specifically here. Yeah, it talks about Pro-Ject, yes, it talks about Lin. I think this is all about Riga. Riga's had the cartridge market largely to itself for a long time for its own turntables, and I think Ortofon has had enough. It's rotating its turret, it's turning its guns on this potentially profitable little niche. That's why the 2MR exists. All of this spacer chat, this 2-screw mounting thing, it's a code for Riga, surely. So the tweaked 2M Red, the 2MR Red, will cost £95. The blue version, £189. The bronze version, £365, and the black, £525. The entire range is out this month. That's your hi-fi news. Let's talk hints and tips. I've got a speaker-related hint tip for beginners now, and one that looks at positioning. That is, when you buy your speakers, you hook them up to your hi-fi and you switch on and you play some music, and the basic sound will, I'm sure, sound very nice indeed. But the structure of the sound, where the sound emerges from, how it's structured within the soundstage, where the drums are positioned, for example, that lead guitar, all of that might sound possibly a little off, a bit skewed, perhaps. Maybe it doesn't sound right somehow. So, for example, if you're listening to your speakers and let's say the stereo image is a little wonky, then a quick positional tweak might sort the issue. So, when playing a piece of vinyl, CD, or a stream, what if the lead vocal, say, should be dead center? That's what it should be. And let's say it isn't. The vocal, instead of coming from the center, is actually coming from the left, from my direction, from the left. What do you do then? Well, to correct this issue, try pushing that left speaker back a tad. Not too much, a little bit at a time, actually. I would move and listen, move and listen. The more you push back that speaker, the more that vocal should move. If it's supposed to be in the middle, it'll move slowly towards the center. You'll hear it creeping over. Alternatively, on the other side of the coin, you could drag the right speaker forward towards you, and that'll achieve the same end. It depends how far the speakers are from your listening position. If they are close enough as it is, pulling a speaker towards you might not be a good thing. So, generally speaking, I always recommend you push the offending speaker backwards a little bit. Now, yes, you can measure the speakers in relation to the room, so each speaker is exactly the same distance from your ears. However, I find that the manual tweaking is better. Sometimes the measuring thing doesn't quite work out. I don't know, some people's ears may not be fixed exactly on their head as should be, or maybe your hearing on your left and right speaker might not be quite the same, or there might be some wrinkle in the room design which interferes with that. So I would go through this tweaky bit, this speaker moving. I would do it manually and I would do it by ear. Now, be careful with some speakers. For example, I use a pair of Quad 57 electrostatics, and they need tiny adjustments to change the structure of the soundstage. So for my quads, I will be nudging my speakers forwards and backwards by a centimeter or less here and there to secure a balanced soundstage and to find a perfect stereo image. Other speakers, of course, may need far larger movements. Experiment. See what works for your speakers. You can't break anything by doing this, and all you will lose is time. And time invested in setting up your speakers is time well spent, in my opinion. Be patient though, and you will notice the entire stereo image settling in, and there'll be a point when your speakers form a sort of 3D effect. The sound will kind of lock into place, and you will know everything sounds right. That's one area of positioning. There are other areas of positioning I would like to talk about. Maybe I'll come back to this in another time, maybe next week. I'll see how it goes. Now, before we go, let's look at the answer to that trivia question. And to remind you, that question again, which artist won the Grammy for Album of the Year in 1974, 75, and 77? And the answer is Stevie Wonder. He won in 1974 for Innovisions, in 1975 for Full Thing's First Finale, and in 1977 for Songs in the Key of Life. Now, when Paul Simon picked up the Album of the Year award for Still Crazy After All These Years in 1976, he thanked Stevie Wonder for not putting out an album that year. So now you know, and thank you very much for staying to the end of this video. And I'll be back next week with another one, and I hope you'll join me then. Can I thank you very much for all of your support on Patreon, and it makes a big difference. It keeps me going. It helps to pay my bills and to enable me to do this, to do what I do on Patreon, on YouTube, on my website, and elsewhere. So thank you very much indeed. I'll be back, as I say, next week with another HiFi news. We'll see you then. Hopefully I'll have your company. Until then, folks, bye-bye for now.